Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library, and I'm here to continue reading out loud to you from Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede. This is the first book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and it's published by Scholastic, who has allowed us to read it to you. We're starting off with chapter 6 today, in which the wizards do some snooping and Cimarine snoops back. Right before this, Cimarine had just met some of the other princesses who belong to some of the dragons where she is. Most of them were not very interested in being a dragon's princess, but she did find a friend in Alianora, and together they were able to find a spell that Cimarine had been looking for, a fireproofing spell. So, take a sip of water. And we'll start with chapter 6, in which the wizards do some snooping and Cimarine snoops back. For the next 3 weeks, Cimarine spent most of her free time studying the fireproofing spell and collecting the ingredients that she would need to cast it. A few, like the wolfsbane and feverfew, she could gather herself from the herbs that grew on the slopes of the mountains. Alianora found a little jar of hippopotamus oil among the cosmetics left by her predecessor. The unicorn water Cimarine got from Morwen after promising her a copy of the spell if it worked. She went to Kazul about the white eagle feathers, though she was a little afraid to explain what she needed them for. She didn't want Kazul to think that she was worried about Kazul losing her temper and accidentally roasting her. Fortunately, the dragon found the whole idea very interesting. "It could be very useful," Kazul said reflectively. "There are enough hot-tempered youngsters around that it would be well worth fireproofing the princesses who have to deal with them." "I'm not sure it will be able to fireproof anyone at all," Cimarine said. "I still need the white eagle's feather and the powdered hen's teeth, and nobody seems to have any." "I'll see what I can do," Kazul said, and in a few days she dropped a bundle of white feathers at the door of the kitchen. Half a feather was stuck to one of her right claws, and another was caught between two of her teeth, and she looked very pleased with herself. Cimarine decided not to ask any awkward questions. Even Kazul, however, could not find any hen's teeth, so Cimarine had to keep putting off trying the spell. When she wasn't working on collecting the ingredients for the fireproofing spell, Cimarine read the Historia Draconum. It was very difficult at first. After all, it had been a long time since her last Latin lesson. She kept working at it until she started to remember the right endings for all the declinations and conjugations and cases. Shortly after that, she realized that she was not having to look up quite as many words as she had at the beginning. From then on, her progress was rapid. It helped that she found the book fascinating. Dragon history was not a subject commonly taught to princesses in Linderwall, but now she was a dragon's princess, and she had personal reasons to be interested. Besides, the history of the dragons was very exciting. Every page was full of descriptions of dragons ravaging villagers, carrying off princesses, defeating knights and princes, and occasionally being defeated by them, and fighting with wizards, giants, and each other. When the book wasn't describing battles, it was describing famous dragons' hordes and peculiar draconian customs. Cimarine was in the library with the Historia Draconum in front of her and her Latin dictionary on the table beside her left hand when she heard someone calling from the front of the cave. She hoped it would be at least a little longer before the night started to come back, so she couldn't help but sighing as she stuck a leather bookmark into the book and closed it. Then she went out to argue with whoever it was until they went away. 2 wizards were standing just outside the mouth of the cave. Cimarine saw their wooden staffs first, before she was close enough to see their faces. As she came nearer, she recognized the one on the left as Zeminar. The one on the right was taller and younger, his brown hair and beard showing no trace of gray. His blue and brown robes were identical to the older wizard's, except for the colors. His eyes were the same bright black as his companions, and he looked at Cimarine in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Good morning to you, Princess Cimarine," Zeminar said. "I thought I would take you up on your kind invitation to visit. I hope we haven't come at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," Cimarine said, thinking hard. She had promised Kazul that she would try to find out what Zeminar was after if he showed up, too, and here he was. Maybe if she convinced him that she was as silly as some of her sisters, he would be careless enough to let something slip. "I thought perhaps we might have, since it took you so long to come out," Zeminar said mildly. but Simrine thought that there was a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "I must not have heard you right away," Simrine said, batting her eyelashes innocently, the way her next youngest sister did whenever she had done something particularly foolish. "Kazul has quite a large set of caves, and I was in one of the back ones. I'm so sorry." "Ah," said Zemnar, stroking his beard with his left hand, "that would make it difficult for you. Perhaps we could set up a spell for you, one that would let you know whenever anyone comes to visit. It would be more pleasant for visitors, too, if they didn't have to shout. What do you think, Antoro?" "Like the one at the headquarters of the Wizard Society," the second wizard said, nodding. "We could do it in 2 or 3 minutes, right from here. It would be easy." Zemnar shot a dark look at his companion. Simrine was pretty sure that he wanted to pretend that he was inventing a difficult new spell so that he would have an excuse to wander around Kazul's cave. "Quite so," said Zemnar. "Well, Princess?" "Oh dear, I don't know," Simrine said, doing her best to imitate the way her eldest sister behaved whenever anyone wanted her to decide anything. "It sounds very nice, but Kazul is so picky about where things go and how they're done. Oh no, I simply couldn't let you do anything like that without asking Kazul first." "What a pity," Zemnar said. His companion coughed and shuffled his feet. Yes, let me introduce you to my son, Antorel. Hope you don't mind me bringing him along." "Of course not," Simrine said politely. "I'm pleased to make the acquaintance of such a lovely princess," Antorel said, bowing. Simrine blinked. This wasn't getting anywhere. Maybe if she brought them inside, they'd relax a little. "Thank you," she said to Antorel. "Won't you come in and have some tea?" "We would be delighted," Zemnar said quickly, "if you lead the way, Princess." "This way," Simrine said. She stopped just inside the mouth of the cave and gave the wizards her sweetest, most innocent smile. "You can leave your staffs right here. Just lean them up against the wall." Antorel looked considerably startled, and Zemnar frowned. "Is this too something your dragon requires?" "I don't know," Simrine said, wrinkling up her forehead the way her third from eldest sister did whenever she was puzzled, which was often. "But they'll be ever so awkward in the kitchen. Don't you think so? There's not very much room." "We'll manage," Zemnar said. Simrine hadn't really expected to get the wizards to let go of their staffs, but it had been worth a try. She shrugged and smiled and led them into the kitchen, where she made a point of bumping into their staffs or tripping over them as often as possible. Finally, Antorel turned his sideways and stuck it under the table. Zemnar hung on to his with a kind of grim, suspicious stubbornness that made Simrine wonder whether she was fooling him at all with her pretend sillinesses. The wizard made uncomfortable conversation about the weather and the size of the kitchen for several minutes while Simrine fixed the tea and poured it. "Are the rest of Kazul's caves this large?" Zemnar asked as Simrine handed him his teacup. She had given him one with a broken handle, even though he was a guest, because she didn't trust him. "Oh, yes," Simrine said. She was beginning to think that she was never going to find out anything. The two wizards seemed perfectly happy to sit at the kitchen table and talk about nothing for hours. "Remarkable," Antorel said in an admiring tone. "You know, we wizards don't often get to see the inside of a dragon's cave." "I'll bet you don't," thought Simrine as she gave him a puzzled smile. "That's too bad," she said out loud. "Yes, it is," Zemnar said. "Perhaps you'd be willing to show us around." Simrine thought very rapidly. It was obvious that she wasn't going to learn anything if the wizards just sat in the kitchen and drank tea, so she decided to take a chance. "Well," she said in a doubtful tone, "I suppose it would be all right, as long as I don't take you into the treasure rooms." "That's fine," Antorel said, a little too quickly. "You won't touch anything, will you?" Simrine said as they stood up. "Kazul is so particular about where things are kept." "Of course not," Zemnar said, smiling insincerely. Simrine smiled back and led the way out into the hall. She watched the wizards carefully as she took them through the very large main cave, the general storage caverns, and a big cavern where Kazul visited with other dragons. Zemnar made polite noises about the size and comfort of everything, but nothing that she showed him seemed to interest him. "And this is the library," Simrine said, throwing open the door. "I am impressed," Zemnar said, and Simrine could tell that he did mean it. She stepped sideways so that she could keep an eye on both of the wizards at the same time. "A remarkable collection," Andrel commented. He began to walk around the room, admiring the bookshelves and scanning the titles of the book. "What's this?" Zemnar said, bending over the table. "The Historia Draconum. A surprising choice for light reading, Princess." His eyes met Zimmerine, and they were hard and bright and suspicious. "Oh, I'm not reading it," Zimmerine said hastily, opening her eyes very wide. "I just thought it would make the library look nicer to have a book or two sitting out on the table. More lived in." Zeminar nodded, looking relieved and faintly contemptuous. "I think it works very well, Princess," he said, "very well indeed." And then he looked over at the other side of the room and said sharply, "Antorel, what are you doing?" Zimmerine turned her head in time to see Antorel put out a hand and deliberately tip several books off one of the shelves. "Stop that," she said, forgetting to sound silly. "I'm very sorry, Princess," Antorel said. "Will you help me put them back where they belong?" Zimmerine had no choice but to go over and help him. It took several minutes to get everything back in place because Antorel kept dropping things. Zimmerine got quite annoyed with him and finally did it herself. As she started to turn back to the center of the room, she caught a glimpse of Zemnar hastily closing the Historia Dracorum. Zimmerine pretended not to notice, but she made a mental notice that he had been looking at something near the middle of the book. "That was dreadfully careless of you," Zimmerine said, frowning at Antorel. "Very clumsy," Zemnar agreed. "I don't know what Kazul will say when she finds out about it," Zimmerine went on. "Really, it's too bad of you. I did ask you not to touch anything." "Yes, you did," Zemnar said, "and I wouldn't like to think we had gotten you in trouble. Perhaps it would be best if you didn't mention it to Kazul that we were here at all." "I suppose I could do that," Zimmerine said in a doubtful tone. "Of course you can," Antorel said encouragingly. "I'll come back in a few days to make sure everything's all right." "I think it's time that we were on our way," Zemnar said, giving his son a dark look. "Thank you for showing us around, Princess." Zimmerine escorted them out of the cave and made sure that they had left, then hurried back to the library. She spent the next several hours poring over the middle parts of the Historia Dracorum, trying to find out what Zemnar had been looking at. She was still there when Kazul arrived home and called for her. "That wizard Zemnar finally came, and he brought his son along with him," Zimmerine said as she came out of the library. "I know," Kazul said. Her voice sounded a little thick, as if she had a cold. "I could smell them the minute they came in." "Is that why you sound so odd?" Zimmerine asked. "You're not going to sneeze, are you?" "I don't think so," Kazul replied. "Don't worry about it. I'll have plenty of time to turn my head away." "I wish I could get hold of some hen's teeth," Zimmerine said, frowning. "That fireproofing smell." "Have you looked in the treasure rooms?" Kazul asked. "No," Zimmerine replied, startled. She remembered seeing a number of jars and bottles of various shapes and sizes when she had been organizing the treasure, but none of them had been labeled. "I didn't think of it. And besides, it's your treasure." "You're my princess, at least until someone rescues you or I decide otherwise," Kazul pointed out. "Go ahead and look, and if you find any hen's teeth, use them. But be careful when you're checking the jars, though. There are one or two with lead stoppers that shouldn't be opened." "Lead stoppers," Zimmerine said. "I'll remember." "Good. Now what did those wizards want?" "I'm not sure." Zimmerine explained everything that had happened, including how she had seen Zemnar close the history book as she turned, and how the two wizards had been perfectly willing to leave right after that. But just before they disappeared, Antorel said he might come back another time, Zimmerine concluded. "I don't know whether they found what they were looking for or not." "Do you know what part of the Historia Dracorum Zemnar was reading?" Kazul asked. "Somewhere in the middle, a little past my bookmark," Zimmerine replied. "I was just looking at it when you came in. It's the part about how the dragons came to the Mountain of Mornings and settled in the cave and chose a king." "That's the section where the Historia describes the caves of fire and night, isn't it?" Kazul asked. Zimmerine nodded. There was a whole page about somebody finding a stone in the cave so the dragons could pick a king. It didn't make much sense to me. "Colin stone," Kazul said, nodding. "We've used it to choose our king ever since the first time. When a king dies, all the dragons go to the Ford of the Whispering Snakes in the Enchanted Forest and take turns trying to move Colin stone from there to the Vanishing Mountain, the one that The one that succeeds is the next king. What if there are 2 dragons that are strong enough to move it? Cimarine asked curiously. It's not a matter of strength, Gazul said. Stone isn't much larger than you are. Even a small dragon could carry that much weight twice around the enchanted forest without any trouble at all. But Stone has an aura, a kind of vibration. When you carry it, you can feel it humming through your claws, and the humming gets stronger the further you go until your bones are shaking. Most dragons have to drop it or be shaken to pieces, but there's always one who is suited to the stone. For that dragon, the stone's humming is just a pleasant buzz, and so of course it's easy to get it to the finishing mountain. You sound as though you have had experience, Cimarine said. Of course, Gazul responded matter-of-factly. I was old enough to participate in the tests. When the last king died, she smiled reminiscently. I got further than anyone expected me to, though of course I wasn't one of the top 10 by any means. Cimarine tilted her head to one side, considering. I think I'm glad that you didn't win. Oh, why's that? Gazul sounded amused. Because you wouldn't have had any use for a princess if you were the queen of the dragons, and if you hadn't decided to take me on, that yellow-green dragon Morans probably would have eaten me, Cimarine explained. You mean if I were the king of the dragons, Gazul corrected her. The queen of the dragons is a dull job. But you're a female, Cimarine said. If you'd carried stones from the Fort of the Whispering Snakes to the Vanishing Mountain, you'd have had to be queen, wouldn't you? No, of course not, Gazul said. Queen of the Dragons is a totally different job from king, and it's not one I'm particularly interested in. Most people aren't. I think the position's been vacant since Orin tore his wing and had to retire. But King Tokaz is a male dragon, Cimarine said, then frowned. Isn't he? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it, Gazul said a little testily. King is the name of the job. It doesn't matter who holds it. Cimarine stopped and thought for a moment. You mean that the dragons don't care whether their king is male or female. The title is the same no matter who the ruler is. That's right. We like to keep things simple. Oh. Cimarine decided to return to the original topic of conversation before the dragon's simple idea confused her any further. Why would the wizards be interested in Stone if it's only used for picking out kings of the dragons? I doubt they are, Gazul replied. However, Stone was found in the Caves of Fire and Night, and wizards have always been interested in the caves. But the dragons control most of them, and all the easy entrances are ours, so the wizards have never been able to find out as much as they would like. The Historia Draconum is one of the few books that talks about the caves at all, and there aren't many copies. I'd wager Zeminar would have stolen it outright if he thought he could get away with it. I thought the dragons let the wizards into the Caves of Fire and Night, Cimarine objected. Why would Zeminar be poking through history books looking for information when he can just go and look at them whenever he wants? We don't let the wizards visit whenever they wanted, Gazul said. If we did, they'd be running in and out all the time, and no one would be able to breathe without sneezing. No, they're limited to certain times of days, and if they wanted to visit the Caves of Fire and Night, otherwise they have to use one of the entrances we don't control. Few of them try. There are other ways of getting into the cave, but they're all very dangerous, even for wizards. Maybe they're looking for an easier way in. Gazul did not seem to be paying much attention to this. She thought for a moment and then turned towards the cave mouth. I'm going to see Garum. Roxine said that a book had been stolen from her library, and I want to know which one. I'll be back in a few hours. I think I'll go look at the Historia Dracorum again while you're gone, Cimarine said thoughtfully. If there is something useful in it about the Caves of Fire and Night, maybe I can find it now that I know what I'm looking for. Cimarine spent the rest of the afternoon carefully translating the chapter that talked about the caves. She was disappointed to find that there was very little about the caves themselves, though what there was interesting. The book told how the dragons had discovered the back way into the caves and described some of the things that they had found. Caverns full of blue and green fire, pools of black liquid that would cast a cloud of darkness for 20 miles if you poured 3 drops on the ground, walls made of crystal that multiplied every sound 1,000-fold, rocks that spurted fire when they were broken. Most of the rest of the chapter was about Stone and how it was taken out of the caves by the first king of dragons. Gazul returned just before dinner, and she and Cimarine compared notes. Cimarine told Gazul what she had learned in the chapter about the Caves of Fire and Night, and then Gazul explained what she had learned from Garum. The stolen book was the King of the Dragons, and the entire first section was about Collinstone and the Caves of Fire and Night, Kazul said. And only a wizard could have gotten past the spells and safeguards that Goron imparts on our library. I think that settles it. The wizards are definitely collecting information about the Caves of Fire and Night. Then why do they keep looking at books about dragon history? Cimmerian asked. It seems like a roundabout way of finding out whatever it is that they want to know. There isn't any other way to do it, Kazul said. Nobody but dragons has ever had much to do with the caves, and no one has written much about them except in dragon histories. Even the wizards weren't particularly interested in them until a few years ago, except as a reliable route into the Enchanted Forest. But from what I'm reading in the Historia Dracorum, the caves sound fascinating, Cimmerian said. You mean to say that no one has ever written about anything about the Caves of Fire and Night except for the dragons? That's... Kazul stopped suddenly, and her eyes narrowed. No, that's not right. There was a rather rumpled scholar who talked his way into the caves a century or so back, and after he left he wrote an extremely dry book about what he found there. I'd forgotten about him. Do you have a copy? Cimmerian asked hopefully. No, Kazul said, but I don't think the Society of Wizards does either. There aren't very many of them printed, and a lot of those were lost in a flood a few years ago. Some hero or other shoved a giant into a lake to drown him. The silly Clunch didn't realize that if he put something big into a lake, the water would have to go somewhere. Well, that doesn't do us much good, Cimmerian said. It's nice that the Society of Wizards doesn't have the copy of the book, but if we can't get hold of one either... I didn't say that, Kazul said. I don't have a copy myself, but I know who does. Who? Said Cimmerian impatiently. Morwen. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to work on that fireproofing spell of yours tomorrow. We are going to take a trip to the Enchanted Forest instead. Now, Chapter 7, in which Cimmerian and Kazul make a journey underground. Cimmerian was surprised to hear that Kazul intended to take her along to the visit to Morwen, and she was not entirely sure that she liked the idea. She had heard a great deal about the Enchanted Forest, and none of it was reassuring. People who traveled there were always getting changed into flowers or trees or animals or rocks, or doing something careless and having their heads turned backwards, or being carried off by ogres or giants or trolls, or enchanted by witches or wicked fairies. It did not sound like a good place for a casual, pleasant visit. On the other hand, it seemed unlikely that anything dreadful would happen to Cimmerian if she were traveling with a dragon, and she was looking forward to seeing Morwen again. Besides, Cimmerian was curious. And anyway, she said to herself, Kazul says I'm going, and there's no point in worrying about it if I don't have a choice. Nevertheless, she decided to take one of the smaller magic stores along with her. If Kazul said it was all right, Cimmerian said no point in taking unnecessary chances. Kazul had no objections, so Cimmerian picked out a small, plain-looking sword in a worn leather scabbard that made the wearer invincible, and they started off. Cimmerian had assumed that Kazul would fly through the pass, but Kazul said no. It's not that easy getting into the Enchanted Forest, she explained. At least not if you're trying to get in. Princes and youngest sons and particularly clever tailors stumble into it by accident all the time, but if one wants to go there on purpose, one has to follow the proper route. I didn't think dragons had that kind of problem, Cimmerian said. Dragons don't, Kazul replied, but you are not a dragon. So instead of flying through the pass of silver ice, Kazul led Cimmerian through the tunnels. Cimmerian had to walk very quickly to keep up, even though Kazul was moving very slowly. It was not long before she was wishing that the tunnels were high enough for her to ride on Kazul's back. The route twisted around and up and back and forth and down and around again until Cimmerian was thoroughly lost. Finally, they came to a gate made of iron bars that completely blocked the passage. Cimmerian studied it carefully, but she could see no sign of a handle or lock. This is the entrance to the Caves of Fire and Night, Kazul said. Be careful from here on. And don't wander away, or you will get lost. Cimmerian refrained from saying that as far as she was concerned, they were lost already. How are you going to open it? She asked instead. Like this, said Kazul. By night and flame and shining rock, open thou thy hidden lock. Alberologarn. It was the sound of Kazul's voice, dying away, that made the iron door swing open silently. It's a very unusual opening spell, Cimarine commented, impressed. It wasn't always that complicated, Kazul said. She sounded almost apologetic. I believe the first version was simply open sesame, but word got around and we had to change it. Cimarine nodded and followed Kazul through the gate and into the caves of fire and night. For the first 100 yards or so, the only difference Cimarine could see between these caves and the ordinary tunnels on the other side was that the caves of fire and night were warmer. Then, very suddenly, her lamp went out, plunging everything into complete and utter blackness. Cimarine stopped walking immediately. Kazul? It's quite all right, Princess, Kazul's disembodied voice said from out of the darkness. This happens all the time here. Don't bother trying to relight the lamp. Just put your hand on my elbow and follow the way. All right, Cimarine said doubtfully. She groped with her free hand in the direction of Kazul's voice and scraped her knuckles on the dragon scales. Ow! Take your time, Kazul advised. I'm ready, Cimarine said. Her right hand was pressed flat against the cool, rough-edged scales at the back of Kazul's left forearm. Just don't move too fast or I'll lose you or get stepped on or something. Kazul did her best to oblige, but Cimarine still had difficulty keeping up. She had to take at least 3 steps for every one of Kazul's, and it seemed like every time she moved her foot, she hit a rock or an uneven place on the tunnel floor. She would stumble, and her hand would scrape and slide against Kazul's scales. She was afraid that she would lose contact with the dragon. Are you sure I shouldn't try and relight the lamp? Cimarine said after her 5th painful stumble and slide. Quite sure, Kazul said. You see, it isn't... Ah, there it goes. While Kazul was speaking, there was a flicker of light, and then the darkness rolled aside like a curtain being pulled. Cimarine found herself standing in a large cave whose walls glittered as if they were studded with thousands of tiny mirrors. The lamp in her left hand was burning cheerfully once more. Was it the lamp? Cimarine asked after studying it for a moment. Or was it me? It was the caves, Kazul said. It's one of the reasons they are of night as well as of fire. Only one of the reasons, Cimarine said thoughtfully. I don't like the sound of that. You'll be quite all right as long as you're with me, Kazul assured her. A very few things are willing to mess with the dragon, even in the dark. And the periods of darkness don't last long. It's because the magic of these caves doesn't affect us as much as other people, or so I'm told. You mean the blackness is likely to come back? Kazul nodded. Then let's get as far as we can before it does, Cimarine said, and started across the cave. There were 4 tunnels leading out of the opposite side of the glittering cavern. Kazul took the second from the left without hesitating. Where do all those tunnels go? Cimarine asked, glancing at the other 3 openings as she followed Kazul. The one on the right leads to a chain of caverns, Kazul said over her shoulder. The first few are quite ordinary, but then you come to one full of hot sulfur pools. Some of the older dragons bathe there. They claim the water is good for rheumatism. Beyond that is a cave with molten silver dripping down from the walls, and the chain ends in a deep chasm with a river of red-hot melted rock at the bottom. That doesn't sound very attractive, Cimarine commented. The dwarfsmiths find it very useful for forging magic swords, Kazul assured her. The second tunnel on the right takes you to a maze. The tunnel and caverns constantly shift around, so that no matter how careful you are to mark your way, you always get lost. Even dragons? Kazul nodded, though I believe there was one prince who managed to find his way out with a magic ball of string. Oh, bother, Cimarine said. The lights had gone out again just as they emerged into a small cave. It's quite all right. This part's easy, Kazul said. Next time I'm going to bring a cane, Cimarine muttered. Where do the other tunnels lead? The one on the far left goes through a couple of caverns that are pretty but not very interesting. We're always chasing knights and princesses out of it, though. They come for flasks of water from a bottomless pool at the very end. What does it do? Cimarine asked. Ow! She had just banged her right elbow against the wall of the cave in the dark. It casts a cloud of darkness for 20 miles around when it's poured on the ground, Kazul replied. How useful, Cimarine muttered balefully, rubbing her elbow. And this tunnel leads to the Enchanted Forest by way of the King's Cave, Kazul finished. Oh, good, Cimarine said. I was hoping to see that. The King's Cave was the chamber where the first King of Dragons had found Colin's stone, and the Historia Dracorum had not described it anywhere near well enough to suit Cymrine. At least here's the light coming back, thank goodness. Let's hurry before it goes off again. They went through 3 small caves and 2 more periods of blackness before they reached the King's Cave. Kazul pointed out various locations of interest, such as the wall of crystal with a chip in one corner, where the prince of the ruby throne had stolen a piece to make a magic ring, and a jewel-studded cavern where the King of Dragons met with people who needed impressing. There was one very eerie cave full of slabs of black rock. Most were standing on end, though a few had fallen over. Kazul said that they were all enchanted princes. All of them? Cymrine asked, appalled. There were at least 40 slabs, and the cave was quite crowded. No, that one on the end there is just an ordinary boulder. How did it happen? The princes came to steal some of the water of healing from the well at the end of the cave, Kazul said. There are 2 dippers by the well. One is tin and the other is solid gold and covered with jewels. The princes all try to use the gold one, even though they were told that only the tin dipper would work. It's no more than they deserve. Cymrine frowned, thinking that some of the princes she had known. Well, I don't deny that they probably behaved foolishly, but foolishly, Kazul snorted. Any reasonable, well-educated prince ought to have the sense to follow the directions when he's on a quest. But all of these fellows were sure they knew better. If they had simply done what they were told, they wouldn't be here. Still, turning them into slabs of stone forever seems a bit extreme. Oh, they won't be stone forever, Kazul said. Sooner or later, someone will come along who has the sense not to improvise, and he'll succeed in getting the water. Then he'll use some of it to disenchant this lot, and the cave will be empty for a while until the next batch of young idiots starts arriving. Cymrine felt better knowing that the princes would someday be free, but she had sense enough not to try doing it herself. Since she had not been sent on a quest for the water of healing, it was highly unlikely that she would be able to disenchant the princes, even if she did succeed in taking the water. And she knew enough about quests and enchantments and obtaining of things with magical properties to know that she would probably get into a lot of trouble if she tried. So she tucked the matter into the back of her mind and followed Kazul through the stone-filled cavern. She was careful not to step on any of the fallen slabs. Just outside the entrance to the next cave, Kazul stopped. This, she said, is the King's Cave. We have to cross it as quickly as we can. Don't stop in the middle, and don't say anything while we're inside. Understand? Good. Come on, then. As soon as she stepped in the cave, Cymrine understood the reasoning for Kazul's request for silence. The walls, ceiling, and the floor were made of a dark, shiny stone that multiplied and threw back echoes of even the smallest down. The soft scraping of Kazul's scales against the floor sounded like 30 men sawing at wood, and the tiny gasp Cymrine gave at the sight and sound of the cave was as loud as if she had shouted. Cymrine went on as quietly and carefully as she could. Halfway across, she noticed the vibration. It began as a gentle, not unpleasant buzzing in her bones, unrelated to the loud and continually multiplying echoes of her passage, though it too was growing stronger the further into the cave she went. Kazul was in front of her now, and she saw the dragon's tail lash once, as if in pain or anger. Suddenly she remembered Kazul's description of the aura that made it impossible for most dragons to carry Colin's stone, and that this was the place where Colin's stone had been. No wonder Kazul was uncomfortable. Cymrine found herself wishing that she could stop and pay attention to the humming in her bones, but she remembered Kazul's directions and continued walking. She had nearly reached the exit when she saw a pebble about the size of her thumbnail, made of the same dark, shiny stone on the cavern walls. Kazul had said nothing about picking things up, so Cymrine veered a little to the right and scooped up the pebble as she passed. A moment later, she was out of the cave. Phew, said Kazul, I'm glad that's over. From here on, it should be easy. Good, Cymrine said. She dropped the pebble into her pocket to look at more closely later, and followed Kazul down the narrow, winding tunnel. That's the end of Chapter 7. Our next chapter tomorrow is Chapter 8, in which Cymrine and Kazul pay a call, and Cymrine gets into a fight. Sounds very exciting. Thank you for joining me today. We're reading from Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede, published by Scholastic, who has allowed us to read this to you. My name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Bye!